The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Hannah Sawyer stumbled toward the Tucson post office, the edges of her vision blurring like a watercolor painting left in the rain. It was the summer of 1878, and the thermometer outside the general store had read 102 degrees before it, too seemed to surrender to the heat. Hannah had traveled all the way from Boston with nothing but 3 dresses, a handful of letters, and the promise of a teaching position that would begin in the fall. The journey had taken every penny she had saved during her 3 years working as a governess for the Whittaker family. At 23, she had decided it was time to forge her own path, away from the suffocating expectations of Boston society. As she approached the post office, the white hot sun reflecting off the wooden building made her dizzy. Hannah had been rationing her canteen of water, not realizing how quickly the desert heat would drain her strength. Her corset felt like a vise around her ribs, and her heavy skirts clung to her legs with each labored step. Just a few more steps, she whispered to herself, gripping the letter from her sister. She needed to mail it to let her family know she had arrived safely. But the wooden porch of the post office seemed to tilt beneath her feet, the world spinning like a child's top. Hannah felt her knees buckle. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a tall figure rushing toward her from across the dusty street. Miss, can you hear me?" The voice was deep and gentle, filtering through the fog in Hannah's mind. She felt something cool against her forehead and slowly opened her eyes to find herself lying in the shade of the post office porch. A man was kneeling beside her, his concerned face partially shadowed by the brim of his cowboy hat. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thought we might need to fetch the doctor." Hannah tried to sit up, but the man placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy now, the heat's no joke out here, especially for folks not used to it." He offered her a canteen. Small sips. Hannah took the canteen with trembling hands and followed his instructions. The water was warm but felt like salvation against her parched throat. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Name's Declan Vaughn," he said, taking back the canteen and securing it to his belt. "Most folks call me Deck." "Hannah Sawyer," she replied, feeling strength slowly returning to her limbs. "I'm terribly sorry for the trouble." Declan smiled, and Hannah noticed how the expression transformed his sun-weathered face. He wasn't conventionally handsome like the gentleman back in Boston, but there was something compelling about his clear green eyes and the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "No trouble at all, Miss Sawyer. Can't have newcomers fainting in the street on their first day in Tucson." "Makes for a poor welcome." Hannah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "How did you know I just arrived?" "Your boots," he said with a slight grin. "Too new for these parts, plus that accent of yours isn't exactly local." Hannah looked down at her once pristine leather boots, now covered in a fine layer of Arizona dust. "I suppose I do stand out. You were heading into the post office?" Declan asked, nodding toward the letter still clutched in her hand. "Yes, I need to mail this to my family in Boston." "Then lean on me," he said, offering his arm. "No sense risking another spell in this heat." Hannah hesitated only briefly before accepting his help. As she stood, the world tilted again and she gripped his arm tighter. "Lean on me," Declan repeated, his voice softer. "Just until you get your bearings." Inside the post office, the temperature was only marginally better than outside, but at least they were out of the direct sun. The postmaster, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from sorting mail. Another one fainted in the heat. "Deck." He asked with a knowing look. "This is Miss Sawyer," Declan said, ignoring the question. "She needs to send a letter east." While Hannah conducted her business, Declan waited patiently by the door. When she finished, he was still there, hat in hand. "Where are you staying, Miss Sawyer?" "I'd be happy to escort you." "The Willow Creek boarding house," Hannah replied. "Mrs. Peterson's establishment." "Agatha Peterson runs a fine place," Declan nodded approvingly. "But it's a fair walk from here, especially in this heat. My wagon's just outside." Hannah knew that accepting rides from strange men was exactly the sort of thing her mother had warned against, but the prospect of walking several blocks in the blistering heat was daunting. Besides, there was something about Declan Vaughn that inspired trust. That would be most appreciated, Mr. Vaughn. Declan's wagon was simple but well-maintained. He helped Hannah onto the seat before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, seemed equally unfazed by the heat. How long have you been in Tucson? Hannah asked as they pulled away from the post office. Born and raised in the territory, Declan replied. My father came out here in '49 looking for gold, found a wife instead, my mother. His smile was tinged with sadness. Lost them both to fever when I was 16. I'm so sorry, Hannah said, genuinely moved by his matter-of-fact recounting of such a tragedy. Declan shrugged slightly. It's the way of things out here. Life's harder but honest. He glanced at her. What brings a Boston lady to Tucson? I'm to be the new school teacher, Hannah explained. The position begins in September, but I wanted to arrive early to get acquainted with the town. School teacher, huh? Declan nodded thoughtfully. We could use more education around these parts. Too many folks can't read their own names. They rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the wooden wheels of the wagon crunching over the rocky road. Hannah found herself studying Declan's profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the tiny scar near his right temple that told stories he hadn't shared. Here we are, Declan announced as they pulled up in front of a two-story building with a wide porch. Willow Creek Boarding House, finest accommodations in Tucson according to Mrs. Peterson. Hannah smiled at his gentle teasing. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Vaughn. I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Someone would have helped, Declan said modestly, but I'm glad it was me. He jumped down from the wagon and came around to offer his hand. Word of advice, Miss Sawyer, get yourself a proper hat with a wide brim. And drink more water than you think you need. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary as Hannah stepped down from the wagon. There was a current between them, subtle but undeniable. Will I see you again, Mr. Vaughn? The question slipped out before Hannah could consider its propriety. Declan's smile warmed his entire face. Tucson's not so big that our paths won't cross, Miss Sawyer. Besides, I have a feeling you might need someone to show you around. I would like that, Hannah admitted. Then lean on me, Declan said softly, echoing his words from earlier. Lean on me until you find your footing in Tucson. As Hannah watched him drive away, she couldn't help but feel that something significant had just happened, something that went beyond a simple rescue from the heat. For the first time since arriving in Arizona territory, she felt like she might belong here after all. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Hannah settled into life at the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson was a widow in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and a surprisingly tender heart. She took Hannah under her wing, introducing her to the other boarders and giving her practical advice about desert living. You'll need at least 3 more petticoats, lighter ones, Mrs. Peterson advised as they sat on the porch one evening. And for heaven's sake, girl, loosen that corset before you faint again. Hannah blushed. News travels fast. Declan Vaughn carrying a beautiful Eastern lady to his wagon tends to get noticed, Mrs. Peterson said with a knowing smile. He's a good man, that one. Works his ranch just outside of town, raises some of the finest horses in the territory. Hannah tried to appear only politely interested. He was very kind. Kind isn't the word most would use for Dec Vaughn, Mrs. Peterson continued. Honorable, yes. Hardworking, absolutely. But he keeps to himself mostly, especially since his engagement to Clara Wilson ended last year. Hannah's heart sank slightly at this revelation. He was engaged, until Clara decided a rancher's life wasn't grand enough for her tastes, ran off with a silver mine owner from Tombstone. Mrs. Peterson shook her head disapprovingly. Broke that boy's heart, though he'd never admit it. Hannah was still processing this information when a familiar wagon appeared on the street. Declan sat tall in the driver's seat, and beside him was a stack of books. Mrs. Peterson chuckled. Speaking of the devil, and would you look at that, he's brought books. Never known Dec Vaughn to set foot in a library before. Hannah stood as the wagon pulled up to the boarding house. Declan tipped his hat to both women before jumping down. Evening, Mrs. Peterson, Miss Sawyer. His voice was as warm as Hannah remembered. Thought our new school teacher might appreciate some reading material about Arizona territory. The library was clearing out some older volumes. Hannah stepped forward to examine the books, genuine delight spreading across her face. "This is very thoughtful, Mr. Vaughn. Call me Declan, please." He handed her the top book, an illustrated guide to dessert plants and their uses. Figured this one might be particularly useful. Some of these plants can save your life if you know how to use them. Their fingers brushed as Hannah took the book, and that same electric current flowed between them. "Thank you, Declan. I'd be honored if you'd call me Hannah as well." Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "Mr. Vaughn, would you care to join us for supper?" "Nothing fancy, just some stew and biscuits." Declan hesitated, glancing at Hannah. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Not an imposition at all," Hannah said quickly. "Besides, I'd love to hear more about these plants." Over supper, Declan proved to be a fascinating conversationalist. He knew the territory intimately and shared stories of its history that weren't found in any books. Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in years, enchanted by his dry wit and humble wisdom. After the meal, Mrs. Peterson conveniently remembered mending that needed her attention, leaving Hannah and Declan alone on the porch as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold. "It's beautiful," Hannah murmured, gazing at the mountains in the distance. "So different from Boston." "Takes some getting used to," Declan agreed. "But once the desert gets in your blood, no other place feels quite right." Hannah turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Is that why you've stayed? Even after losing your parents?" Declan nodded slowly. "This land is part of me. My father used to say we don't own the land, it owns us." He paused. "But I'll admit there have been times I've considered leaving, starting fresh somewhere else." "After Clara." The name slipped out before Hannah could stop herself. She immediately regretted it when she saw Declan's face tighten. "Mrs. Peterson has been talking, I see." His voice was measured, controlled. "I'm sorry," Hannah said quickly. "It was thoughtless of me to mention it." Declan was quiet for a long moment. "No, it's all right." "Yes, after Clara left, I thought about selling the ranch, moving to California maybe." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "But in the end, I couldn't do it. This is home for better or worse." Hannah wanted to reach out to touch his hand in comfort, but propriety held her back. "For what it's worth, I think she made a terrible mistake." Declan's eyes met hers, surprise evident in them. "You hardly know me, Hannah Sawyer." "I'm a good judge of character," she replied with a small smile. "It's a necessary skill for a teacher." "And what does your judgment tell you about me?" His question was light, but his eyes were intense. Hannah took a breath. "That you're a man of integrity, that you value loyalty and hard work, that you're kind without expecting recognition." She hesitated. "That you've been hurt, but haven't let it make you bitter." Declan stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You see a lot." "I pay attention," Hannah said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Declan stood, breaking the spell. "I should be going. Got an early start tomorrow." He retrieved his hat from the porch railing. Would you perhaps like to see my ranch sometime? Sunday maybe. I could show you some of those plants from the book in their natural setting." Hannah's heart quickened. "I would like that very much. I'll come by around noon if that suits." When Hannah nodded, Declan smiled. "Good night then, Hannah Sawyer. Sleep well." As he walked to his wagon, Hannah called after him. "Declan," he turned. "Thank you for the books." And the conversation. His smile in the moonlight made her breath catch. "Anytime you need anything, Hannah, lean on me." Sunday couldn't come quickly enough for Hannah. She found herself checking the clock throughout Saturday, willing the hours to pass more quickly. She'd never been the type of woman to get flustered over a man, but there was something about Declan Vaughn that captivated her. When Sunday finally arrived, Hannah spent more time than usual on her appearance, settling on her lightest blue dress with white trim. She paired it with the new wide-brimmed hat she'd purchased at Mrs. Peterson's recommendation. Mrs. Peterson watched Hannah's preparations with a knowing smile. My, it's just a visit to a ranch, not a formal ball in Boston." Hannah blushed. "I simply want to look presentable." "MMHMM," Mrs. Peterson hummed skeptically. "Just be careful with that heart of yours, Hannah. Declan's a good man, but he's still healing." "We're just friends," Hannah insisted, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Declan arrived precisely at noon, his wagon freshly cleaned and his clothes noticeably less dusty than usual. He'd even trimmed his beard, Hannah noticed with a flutter of pleasure. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her into the wagon. "That hat suits you." "I had good advice," Hannah replied with a smile. The ride to Declan's ranch took about 45 minutes, during which Hannah saw a side of Arizona territory she hadn't yet experienced. Away from town, the landscape opened up dramatically vast expanses of desert, punctuated by saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels. "There it is," Declan said eventually, pointing toward a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled against a backdrop of rocky hills. Vaughn Ranch. Nothing fancy, but it's home. As they drew closer, Hannah could see several corrals containing horses of various colors, a barn, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "You don't have to say that," Declan chuckled. "I know it's not much compared to what you're used to." "No, I mean it," Hannah insisted. "There's something real about it. Solid." Declan gave her a curious look before turning his attention back to the horses that had noticed their arrival. "Those two bay geldings are going to the army next month," he explained. "The Palomino mare in the far corral just foaled last week." "May I see the foal?" Hannah asked eagerly. Declan's face lit up. "You like horses?" "I've always loved them, though I rarely got to ride in Boston." "Well, we'll have to remedy that," Declan said as he brought the wagon to a stop near the house. "Not today. New riders should start with gentle old Bessie, not these half-wild range horses, but soon." A young man emerged from the barn as they arrived, waving a greeting. "That's Illy," Declan explained. "Works for me full-time. Got 2 other hands, but they're out checking the north pasture today." After Declan helped Hannah down from the wagon, he introduced her to Illy, who tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Sawyer's our new schoolteacher," Declan explained. "Might have to take some lessons myself," Illy joked. "Never did learn my letters proper." "I'd be happy to teach you," Hannah offered genuinely. Illy looked surprised but pleased. "Might take you up on that, miss." After showing Hannah the foal, a spindly-legged little thing with a white blaze down its face, Declan gave her a tour of the ranch. He pointed out the various structures, explained his breeding program, and showed her the spring that provided water even in the driest months. "This land's been good to me," he said as they walked along a small creek that trickled down from the hills. "My father chose well when he settled here." "You've built something wonderful," Hannah said, watching how Declan's face softened when he spoke of his ranch. "It's a work in progress," he replied modestly. "Always more to do." They stopped in a shady spot where the creek widened slightly, forming a small pool. Desert wildflowers dotted the banks, adding splashes of yellow and purple to the landscape. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Declan admitted. "Used to come here as a boy when I needed thinking time." He pointed to some of the plants growing near the water. "See those? They're in your book, desert sage. Indians use it for medicine." Hannah knelt to examine the plant more closely, inhaling its sharp, clean scent. "It's lovely. Thought we might have our picnic here if that suits you." Declan nodded toward a small basket he'd brought along. "Nothing fancy, mind you. Just some cold chicken and biscuits Mrs. Peterson helped me pack." "It's perfect," Hannah assured him. They spread a blanket in the shade and enjoyed their simple meal, the conversation flowing easily between them. Hannah told Declan about her life in Boston, her years as a governess, and her decision to seek independence in the West. "Took courage," Declan commented. "Leaving everything familiar behind," Hannah shrugged slightly, "or desperation. After my parents died, the house went to my older brother. He's recently married, and while his wife is perfectly pleasant, I felt superfluous." "I doubt you could ever be superfluous anywhere," Declan said with surprising intensity. Their eyes met, and Hannah felt that now familiar current between them strengthen. Declan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her hat behind her ear. "Hannah," he said softly, "I know we haven't known each other long, but a sudden shout from the direction of the ranch interrupted whatever Declan had been about to say." They both turned to see Illy running toward them, waving urgently. "Riders coming, looks like trouble." Declan was on his feet instantly, his expression transforming from tender to alert. "Stay here," he told Hannah firmly. "If you hear gunfire, head into those rocks and stay hidden." "Declan," Hannah began, alarmed. "Please," he said, his eyes intense. I need to know you're safe." Without waiting for her response, he hurried towardly, and the two men jogged back toward the ranch house. Hannah stood, heart pounding, torn between following Declan's instructions and going after him. In the end, concern won out over caution. She gathered her skirts and made her way carefully back toward the ranch, staying close to the rocky outcropping that provided some cover. As she drew closer, she could see 3 riders approaching the ranch from the east. Declan and Elise stood in front of the house, both now armed with rifles. The tension in Declan's stance was visible even from a distance. Hannah crept closer, keeping behind a large boulder that offered concealment while allowing her to hear what was happening. "Vaughn," one of the riders called as they drew rein about 20 yards from where Declan stood. "Thought you'd have learned your lesson by now." "This is private property, Miller," Declan replied, his voice cold and level. "You and your boys aren't welcome here." The man called Miller, a heavyset individual with a bushy beard, laughed unpleasantly. "That's funny, because Mr. Blackwood says this whole valley's gonna be his by winter. Says you ought to sell now while you still got a choice. Blackwood can make me an offer in person if he's interested," Declan said evenly, "but he knows my answer hasn't changed. Shame about your south fence line," Miller continued as if Declan hadn't spoken. "Heard it got damaged somehow. And that new stallion of yours, real unfortunate, how spooky horses can be around snakes." Hannah's blood ran cold at the thinly veiled threats. She'd heard of such tactics from land grabbers in the West, intimidation designed to force smaller ranchers to sell. "This is your last warning, Vaughn," Miller said, his hand drifting toward his holstered pistol. "Blackwood's getting impatient." "And this is yours, Miller," Declan replied, raising his rifle slightly. "Get off my land. Tell Blackwood if he wants to talk business, he knows where to find me. But if I see you or any of his other hired guns on my property again, I won't be so hospitable." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Miller might draw his weapon. Instead, he spat on the ground. "You're a dead man, Vaughn, just don't know it yet." With that, he wheeled his horse around, and the 3 riders galloped away in a cloud of dust. Hannah remained frozen behind the boulder, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd heard about the violence of the frontier, of course, but witnessing such a confrontation firsthand was terrifying. "You can come out now, Hannah," Declan called, his voice gentler. "I know you're there." Sheepishly, Hannah emerged from her hiding place. "I was worried," she admitted as she approached. Declan's expression was a mixture of concern and resignation. "I'm sorry you had to see that. This isn't exactly what I had planned for our afternoon." "Who were those men? What did they want?" Hannah asked as she reached him. Declan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Edgar Blackwood owns the biggest ranch in the county and thinks he should own everything else too. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years now." He glanced at the horizon where the riders had disappeared. "Lately, his methods have gotten more persuasive." "Those threats about your fence and your horse already happened," Declan confirmed grimly. "Found my prize stallion dead 2 weeks ago. Snake bite supposedly, though snakes don't usually leave boot prints around." "That's terrible," Hannah exclaimed. "Have you gone to the sheriff?" Declan's laugh was without humor. "Sheriff Bowen owes his job to Blackwood's influence. Best he offered was to look into it when he has time." Illy had moved off to check the perimeter of the property, leaving Hannah and Declan alone by the house. "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly. "This must be so difficult." "It's just business to men like Blackwood," Declan replied, his voice tight. "My family history, my connection to this land, none of that matters to him." "It matters," Hannah said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm. "It matters to you, and it should matter to everyone." Declan looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something in his expression softened. "I'm sorry your first visit here had to include this ugliness." "Don't apologize," Hannah insisted. "I'm glad I know what you're facing." "I should take you back to town," Declan said reluctantly. "It's getting late, and after this, well, I'd feel better knowing you're safely at the boarding house." The ride back to Tucson was quieter than their journey out. Hannah could sense Declan withdrawing into himself, likely regretting that she'd witnessed the confrontation with Miller. As they approached the boarding house, Hannah finally broke the silence. "Declan, please don't let today change anything between us." He glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. I thought after seeing all that, you'd want nothing more to do with me. Most proper Eastern ladies would run screaming from such trouble. I'm not most ladies, Hannah replied with a small smile. And while I don't pretend to understand everything about life out here, I know that what you're fighting for matters. Declan brought the wagon to a stop in front of the boarding house and turned to face her fully. Hannah Sawyer, you continue to surprise me. Good, she said, meeting his gaze steadily. I'd hate to be predictable. A slow smile spread across Declan's face. Would it be too forward if I asked to call on you again, perhaps without the interruption of threatening ranch hands? I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Hannah admitted. Declan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Thank you for today, Hannah, for understanding. Thank you for showing me your world, she replied softly. As she watched him drive away, Hannah knew with sudden clarity that her feelings for Declan Vaughn had progressed far beyond mere friendship. Whether that was wise given the complicated situation with Blackwood was another matter entirely. Over the next few weeks, Hannah's life fell into a pleasant rhythm. She spent her days preparing for the start of the school term, familiarizing herself with the curriculum, and getting to know the families whose children would soon be her pupils. In the evenings, she often found herself in Declan's company. Sometimes he would take her for drives around the countryside, showing her the beauty of the Arizona territory. Other times, they would simply sit on the boarding house porch, talking until Mrs. Peterson pointedly mentioned the lateness of the hour. Hannah learned more about Declan's conflict with Edgar Blackwood, a wealthy cattleman who had come to Arizona after the Civil War and systematically built an empire by buying or intimidating smaller ranchers out of business. The water rights are what he really wants, Declan explained one evening as they sat beneath the stars. My property controls access to the best spring in the county. In drought years, which come more often than not, that spring can mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. And he's willing to threaten you for it, Hannah asked, still struggling to understand the violent reality of frontier justice. Men like Blackwood don't see people just obstacles, Declan said grimly. But enough about my troubles. Tell me more about these plans for your schoolhouse. As September approached, Hannah found herself torn between excitement about beginning her teaching career and anxiety about what might happen to Declan. The incidents at his ranch had escalated another section of fence destroyed, cattle driven off, and most recently, a warning shot fired at Ali as he patrolled the property line. I worry about you, Hannah admitted one night as Declan walked her back to the boarding house after a town social. These men are dangerous. Declan's expression was determined. I won't be bullied off my land, Hannah, not by Blackwood or anyone else. I understand that, she said, touching his arm. I admire your courage, I just don't want to see you hurt. They had reached the boarding house steps and Declan turned to face her. In the soft glow of the porch lantern, his eyes were intense as they searched hers. Hannah, he said softly, these past weeks with you have been, I don't have the words, I never expected to feel this way again after Clara. I never wanted to. Hannah's heart quickened. And how do you feel? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Declan cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, almost hesitant, but as Hannah responded, it deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, Hannah was breathless. Well, she said, a smile playing at her lips. That was quite eloquent. Declan laughed softly, resting his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Sawyer, have been since you fainted at my feet. I did not faint at your feet, she protested with mock indignation. I merely swooned in your general vicinity. Declan's laugh was richer this time. Fine, since you swooned in my general vicinity. The point remains. Hannah's expression grew serious. I'm falling in love with you too, Declan, but I'm afraid not just of Blackwood and his threats, but of what happens when the school term starts. Will there be time for us then? Will the town approve of their schoolteacher courting a rancher? Let them talk, Declan said firmly. As for time, we'll make it. I've waited my whole life to find someone who makes me feel the way you do. I'm not about to let schedules or gossip stand in our way. Hannah smiled, her heart full. When you put it that way, how can I argue? You can't, Declan murmured before kissing her again, more briefly this time. I should go before Mrs. Peterson comes out with her broom. Will I see you tomorrow? Hannah asked. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Declan promised. Now go inside before I forget myself entirely. Hannah watched him walk away, her lips still tingling from his kiss. For the first time since arriving in Tucson, she felt truly at home. The next morning, Hannah was helping Mrs. Peterson prepare breakfast when a commotion outside drew their attention. Looking through the window, Hannah saw a rider dismounting hurriedly, his clothes disheveled and his face grim. It was Illy. Hannah rushed outside, her heart in her throat. Illy. What's happened? Is Declan all right? Illy removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. Miss Sawyer, there's been trouble at the ranch. Dec's been shot. The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. How bad? She managed to ask, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Bad enough, Illy said grimly. Doc Sullivan's with him now, but Dec was asking for you, told me to fetch you if you were willing to come. Of course I'll come, Hannah said immediately. Let me get my things. Mrs. Peterson, who had followed Hannah outside, squeezed her arm. I'll pack some supplies. He'll need clean bandages and broth when he wakes. The ride to the ranch was torturous. Illy explained that they'd caught 2 of Blackwood's men trying to poison the spring. In the ensuing confrontation, Declan had been shot in the shoulder. We got one of them, Illy said with grim satisfaction. Other one got away, but he was bleeding pretty good. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Hannah didn't wait for Illy to help her down. She jumped from the wagon and rushed into the house, following the sound of voices to Declan's bedroom. Dr. Sullivan, a graying man with kind eyes, was just finishing bandaging Declan's shoulder. Declan himself was pale but conscious, his eyes lighting up when he saw Hannah in the doorway. You came, he said, his voice weaker than she'd ever heard it. Of course I came, Hannah replied, moving to his side and taking his hand. Did you think I wouldn't? Dr. Sullivan gathered his instruments. The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate. Keep the wound clean, change the bandages twice daily and watch for fever. I'll check back tomorrow. After the doctor left, Hannah sat on the edge of Declan's bed, still holding his hand. You gave me quite a scare. Wasn't exactly planned, Declan replied with a weak attempt at humor. Sorry to bring you out here like this. Don't you dare apologize, Hannah said firmly. Where else would I be when you're hurt? Declan's eyes held hers. I love you, Hannah. Should have said it properly last night. Hannah felt tears threatening. I love you too, Declan. Now rest. I'll be right here. Over the next few days, Hannah barely left Declan's side. She sent word to the school board that she would need a few days before the term started, and they were surprisingly understanding. Mrs. Peterson brought supplies and helped Hannah tend to Declan, whose strength returned slowly but steadily. On the 3rd day, as Hannah was changing Declan's bandages, he caught her hand. Marry me, Hannah froze. What? Marry me, Declan repeated, his eyes clear and determined. I know it's sudden, and I know we haven't known each other long by most standards. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Declan, you're recovering from a gunshot wound, Hannah said gently. This isn't the time for such decisions. Being shot has a way of clarifying what matters, Declan insisted. I love you, Hannah. I want to build a life with you. Here on this ranch if you're willing, or somewhere else if you're not. Hannah's heart felt too full for her chest. You'd leave your ranch for me? I'd rather not, Declan admitted with a small smile, but I would if that's what it took to be with you. This land, these horses, they're important to me, but not as important as you. Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes. I love this ranch, she whispered. I love seeing you here in the place your father built. I would never ask you to leave it. Is that a yes? Declan asked, hope brightening his eyes. It's a we have more to discuss, Hannah replied, though she couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. Including what to do about Blackwood. I won't marry a man only to become his widow when some land grabber decides to try again. Declan's expression sobered. Fair point. As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion outside drew their attention. Hannah moved to the window and was shocked to see Sheriff Bowen riding up, accompanied by 2 deputies. Stay here, she told Declan, who was already trying to get out of bed. You're in no condition to deal with this. Before Declan could protest, Hannah hurried outside to intercept the sheriff. Lee was already there, rifle in hand, looking wary. "Sheriff," Hannah greeted him with forced politeness. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Bowen, a burly man with a walrus mustache, seemed surprised to see her. "Miss Sawyer, what are you doing here, nursing Mr. Vaughn, who was shot by trespassers 3 days ago?" Hannah replied pointedly. "Trespassers who I understand work for Mr. Blackwood." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "That's actually why I'm here. We've arrested Edgar Blackwood." Hannah stared at him in shock. "What?" "One of his men confessed," the sheriff explained. "Fellow named Miller. Got shot during the altercation here and decided he didn't want to hang for murder if Vaughn didn't make it. Told us Blackwood's been ordering all sorts of illegal activities not just here, but all over the county." "And you believed him?" Hannah asked skeptically. "Had to," the sheriff admitted. "Especially after we found Blackwood's journal detailing payments to various enforcers for specific tasks. Man was meticulous about his bookkeeping, if nothing else." Hannah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "So it's over, just like that?" "Not entirely," the sheriff cautioned. "There'll be a trial. Both Vaughn and his hand here will need to testify, but Blackwood's finished in this territory one way or another." After the sheriff left, Hannah returned to Declan's room to find him sitting up, having heard most of the conversation. "Seems like our problem might be solving itself," he said with cautious optimism. "It seems so," Hannah agreed, sitting beside him, "which removes one obstacle to our future." Declan raised an eyebrow. "Does that mean you're considering my proposal?" Hannah took his hand. "I'm not just considering it, I'm accepting it, on one condition." "Name it," Declan said immediately. "I still want to teach, at least for this year," Hannah said. "I made a commitment to those children and their families. I can't break it." Declan's smile was radiant. "I wouldn't ask you to." "We can make it work. You'll teach during the week, and I'll make sure you get safely back and forth. Eventually, we might even build a proper school right here on the ranch for the children who live too far from town." Hannah leaned forward to kiss him gently. "I like the way you think, Declan Vaughn." "So we're engaged?" Declan asked, his voice hopeful. "We're engaged," Hannah confirmed. "Though let's wait until you're fully recovered before we announce it to the town." "I'd like my first day as a teacher to be about education, not gossip about my romantic life." Declan laughed. "Fair enough. But once I'm back on my feet, all bets are off. I want everyone to know that the most beautiful, intelligent woman in Arizona territory has agreed to be my wife." 2 months later, Hannah stood on the porch of the schoolhouse, watching her pupils race toward waiting parents as another school day ended. She smiled as she spotted a familiar wagon approaching, Declan at the reins. His recovery had been complete, and the trial of Edgar Blackwood had resulted in a lengthy prison sentence. With Blackwood's threats removed, the ranch was thriving, and Declan had even been able to expand his horse breeding operation. "Good day, schoolmarm," Declan asked as he jumped down from the wagon. "Wonderful," Hannah replied, accepting his quick kiss. Jimmy Miller finally mastered his multiplication tables, and little Sarah Thompson wrote her first complete sentence. "Sounds like you're working miracles," Declan said proudly. "Just doing my job," Hannah demurred. "How was your day?" "Productive. Got the new foaling barn framed, and that army captain was mighty impressed with our yearlings." Declan helped her into the wagon. "But the best part of my day is right now collecting my fiancé." As they drove toward the ranch, their ranch now, as Hannah thought of it, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. From fainting in the heat outside the post office to becoming engaged to the most honorable man she'd ever known, it had been quite a journey. "Penny for your thoughts?" Declan asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about the day we met," Hannah replied, "when I fainted and you told me to lean on you." Declan's smile was tender. "Best day of my life, though I didn't know it then." "You told me to lean on you just until I got my bearings," Hannah reminded him. "But I never stopped leaning on you, did I? And I never want you to," Declan said, reaching for her hand. "Lean on me forever, Hannah Sawyer, that's all I ask." "Forever," Hannah agreed, squeezing his hand as they rode toward home together, the setting sun painting the desert in gold, much like the future that stretched before them bright, promising, and filled with love.